Hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things. Now what I've got whizzing around in front of me today is one of the Blitz Legion from Tiny Legend. There's just something about them that seems timely at the moment. With an angry old man on his way back to Armageddon, yeah, maybe it's worth revisiting something that looks kind of like this. Now I have done Steel Legion on the channel a couple of different ways before, so this is just another different method. It cleaves pretty closely to what I've done previously though, but because this time I have the Fanatic range out in front of me, it seemed an interesting opportunity to do that with these paints instead. So all of the paints will be listed in the description below. Let's get started. So before we jump straight into the painting with the other fella, I briefly want to touch on assembly, because these guys being multi-part miniatures rather than the old Steel Legion metals, which are obviously one piece, there's a little bit of finagling to do to get the respirator boxes onto the chests. Now I did find it easiest to kind of hold the respirator box onto the chest with the hose sticking straight up. Then adjust the position, bring the head in with your other hand and sort of wiggle it until you get it facing the way that you want. Now the hoses are designed in such a way that the head is facing either right, left or center. So have a look at that before you go ahead and glue anything down. So holding down the respirator box, pop the head on and start wiggling it into where it's going to sit. And you can kind of adjust with both thumbs. Once you've got them facing the way you want, pop the head out, drop a little bit of glue into the neck area and then glue down the head first. That's what I found the easiest. Then you can let the respirator box drop, pop a little bit of glue on the chest, and sit them back in the way that they were. And you'll see too that because everything doesn't sit perfectly flush with one another, you're going to need to do a little bit of filing with particularly the rifle poses to get the arms to actually sit in place properly. You might not see it, well, you probably can from that angle. A decent chunk of this arm I've actually filed out. I took a round file and just buffed out from the inside so that it would sit flush against the respirator box. Takes a bit of doing, but once it is done, it's cool. They're going to look great once they're painted. So for the actual painting, I've started by priming the miniature in skeleton bone. Now, it might seem an odd choice when there's something out there like desert yellow, but because most of the colors we're going to be applying will either cover this very well, or they will be better off from a lighter primer, this is what I'm going to use. Now, you'll probably see it is a little bit patchy in one or two spots. This is because it was ridiculously cold outside. Yeah, you can prime in worse conditions than I have. I just didn't prep the can probably as well as I should have done. All the same, this is going to be perfect. So we're going to start off by painting his trousers, and that's going to be with deep gray. You'll see straight away I'm splattering that right over the top of his boots, and this is part of the reason why I'm doing this now, because if I had painted his boots or his jacket or what have you, and then splatter it in dark gray, I'd be a little annoyed. All the same, this just takes a couple of seconds. Now, speaking of those lighter colors, what I have is agate skin. This is not going to be relevant to all of your miniatures, but of course, those fellas who have their masks raised, it's a good idea to get in and blast their skin with a base coat now. If you've got a dude, for example, who has his helmet off, don't forget he has ears as well. Now, I don't ordinarily paint the eyes on most of my miniatures, but people get quite cross. They go, why didn't you paint the eyes? So let's do it. Grab yourself a little bit of matte white, and this is actually quite tricky at this range. What I'm going to do is paint a line white across the eyeball, and I'm not worried if I hit pretty much everything else along the way. And then, setting down a little bit of black, we will draw a vertical line roughly towards the center of the eye. Don't worry too much if it is, well, a bit bonkers, let's be honest. Now that looks great, right? So go back to your agate skin from earlier, and now you can tidy up the bits where you clearly don't want that eye color, and basically draw back in the shape of the face around it. Now this is a little easier to do without a camera in the way, so that is what I'm going to do. Now after tidying up around the eyes, you want to leave a little bit more of the white than you might expect, because when we come in to shade this, Obviously, we're going to dull all of that down and bring it in a little bit closer together again. So be a bit more brave with it than you might think, but that's a really quick way of doing eyes. It's not perfect, but it works. Now we can start laying down the base coat for his jacket, and for this I'm going to use Wasteland clay. Now I'm also going to apply this using a dry brush. The wedge tip on these Army Painter dry brushes is really handy for sort of jamming into the recesses back there. As you'll see, this covers really well, but once it has dried, give it a couple of minutes and just see if there's any bits where you need to come back and give it a second. Going over some of the parts of the grey where I might have splurged on the base coats, I might need a second coat there, but as you see, this is very quick. But of course, if you are finding any parts difficult to reach without splattering over the trousers or what have you, just swap down to a smaller brush and finish off that base coat nice and simple. See, now we're getting somewhere. What I'm going to grab now is another dry brush and some Barren Dune. Let me pop them down for a second. What I want to use this for is to introduce a bit of texture to the uniform, because as a quick way of painting, a quick dry brush, so it's not going to make a huge difference to the color, but when we go ahead and shade it, there's going to be a little bit of visual interest and some difference between the high points and the lower parts of the uniform. It's also going to brighten it up just a tiny touch. Now, before we move on to his leather, there are a couple of surprising little colors to pop in here. What I have is Wyvern Fury first of all, and I'm going to use this to paint in the grip on his sword. And you see, obviously, being able to come back and paint his gloves over the top of that is going to be handy. And I'm going to carefully get in here and paint the grip on his fighting knife. I did also sneak a bit of white onto his smoke grenades there. I'm going to need to give that a second coat in a second. But I'm going to flip them around, and I have Evergreen Fog here for the blanket, bedroll, whatever this is. Now I'm going to turn at last to Oak Brown for the leather. So this is going to cover very well, and you'll find it's easiest to start with quite a large brush in parts that are going to be easier to reach. So I'm going to do his boots. This is the base coat brush from the Army Painter. Smash this on there. But when I come to do his webbing, straps and what have you, I am going to swap to a smaller brush because I don't want to make it more difficult on myself than I have to. But that'll take a fair bit of doing, not because it's particularly difficult, there's just a bit of it to do. Obviously on some fellas you're going to have more or less equipment, so the sergeant here that I'm doing, he's probably an outlier, but pays to have a go with it. I have here Prairie Ochre, and I'm going to paint in the little bread bag hanging here in this. There's nothing saying you couldn't do it in leather, it doesn't look like it would be leather to me, so I'm going to give it this kind of canvasy finish instead. Now at this point, it's really just a case of filling in the little details that are left. So what I have here, this is royal blue, and I'm going to use it to base coat the interior of the goggles. Now, one of the benefits to not having painted the rims on these yet is you can be quite messy. And then, across the top, just a quick line of bright sapphire. We'll go back to matte black, and with this I'm going to fill in the respirator box and the hose, and I'll also paint the bayonet case with this. Now there's a couple of details here which I'm going to paint with a mix, and this is half and half deep grey and matte black, so it's just a very dark grey. I'm going to paint in his helmet with it, and I'm also going to paint in his hair. Now I would recommend, if you can get your happy little hands on it, Ironclad Grey from the John Blanche range is actually pretty close to this, so if you want to save having to mix, but since it is only going to show up on a handful of helmets, it's not a big deal to have to mix it up if you're painting a batch of guys at a time. Now for his frag grenades, I have here Woodland Camo. This won't take but a second to apply. One quick thing I am going to do while I've still got some fresh white on my palette is to just dot in these three little, I guess, lamps on the respirator box. Now this is probably not something that I would do with every guy. It's just the Tiny Legend example looks really cool, so I'm going to follow along with that. Now I'm pretty sure that's all of the soft details done, including his helmet of course. So what I'm going to swap to now is gunmetal. And here is where I'm going to start. You know what, we'll start with the sword. That's a nice safe bet. But all of the bits like buttons, buckles, what have you, this, like the oak brown before it, is not going to be terribly difficult. There's just a lot to do. So as well as the sword, let's twirl my brush for a second here, get the point back, and we'll fill in his water container. Now, like I said, that'll take a bit of doing. There's roughly 1,000 pop studs and buttons and what have you on this guy. If you wanted to, I reckon you could skip them, because, you know, in reality they would probably be covered over with a color close to what the actual fabric is. But we aren't painting for reality, we're painting for cool. So I'm going to move on now to weapon bronze, and there's a handful of little brassy bits, little gold bits, which we'll fill in with this, and this will not take long at all by comparison. Okay, so a couple of cheeky little things I did sneak in off screen is the bars on the smoke grenades. I'll probably straighten those up after I've given them a shade. And on the shoulder pads, I've gone ahead and given it a straight red line using the Wyvern Fury from earlier and a 13. I just like 13 as a regimental number for 40k stuff. It feels very on the nose. But what we're going to do now is to shade him. So what I've mixed up, this is half and half strong tone and Speedpaint Medium. You can use the strong tone neat, it will just tint the color quite a lot more. So by thinning it out and applying it over everything, we get the shading effect without it making everything super, super dark. So over everything, you don't want to just bucket it on and then let it sit. You know, apply it, give it a couple of seconds to settle, and then if you find there's any parts where you're getting big clumpy bits, you can shift it around while it is still wet. So, over the entire miniature, and once I'm done with that, we'll give him about half an hour in the sun, if I can find the sun, and see what he looks like once he's all dried. Now, we're cooking. Now, let that dry thoroughly, and it is important that this bit is very dry, because we're going to apply another shade over the top of something. What I have here is military shade, and I'm going to pop this over his helmet. It's going to be relatively subtle, and you can avoid the little eagle if you want to. You don't have to. But this is going to give us just a little bit of that kind of field grey look without having to mix anything else into our colour. It's going to be relatively subtle, but it will look cool once it dries. Now once that has dried as well, you can carry on with a couple of highlights to finish them off. Now, ordinarily, what I would do would be to just do those and then varnish him. But because the shade is a little bit shiny, it can be a little bit tricky to see on the camera what I'm actually doing. So I'm going to step back a little bit. I'm going to take him outside and varnish him first. Now that makes it much easier to see what we're doing. What a difference a varnish makes. What I'm going to turn to first of all is some deep grey. We've still got that on my palette here. And I'm going to pop just a little bit of this on the black details. You don't have to do very much of this. And I'm also going to pop a little bit of it on his hair as well. And then moving up to uniform grey, thin this down a little bit more than you usually would. And you can use this to pop a little bit of a highlight on his trousers. I'd recommend stick to places that are easy to reach here. Now for his jacket, what I have is skeleton bone. And we're going to pop a few little lines of this just at the edges of things like pockets, the very corners of his gear, just enough to straighten it up and add a little bit more visual interest here. You don't want to add too much, because what we'll start doing is actually changing up the color. We don't want to do that if we can avoid it, but just a little to make this look a bit more three-dimensional. Now for his leather stuff, what I'm going to start with is Dryad brown. Now I've thinned this out a little bit more than I normally would, and it's largely because I want to see just how it's going to go on first. There we go. And as it dries, it's going to darken down a little bit. I don't want to go overboard with it straight away. So by thinning it down, I've got a better idea of what I'm going to leave behind. And keeping just a little bit of it on my brush, I have quite a lot of control over where it's going. Now, same as with the metallic stuff to begin with, there's quite a lot of that to highlight, so it's up to you how far you want to take it. I'm actually going to go a little bit bananas here, and I have some ruddy umber. What I'm going to do with this is just tiny little bits at extreme edges of the leather. Now, for some of the shinier silver parts, what I have is a little bit of plate mail metal. And this you can be fairly sparing with, or tidy them up, make them look quite clean. Now, I have highlighted some of that brassy stuff with the plate mail metal that I just had, but for his belt buckle, what I'm going to use is true brass. Now, this is quite a sharp highlight, but a little bit of this across the top of the eagle, and I'll do just the corners off screen, I think. Now, if you are feeling particularly saucy, what you can do is grab some Barbarian flesh and highlight a little bit of his skin. Now, I would suggest, particularly for your regular troopers, you've got guys who've just got their goggles up or what have you, you're probably not going to need to do this. But for this fella, let's go ahead, see how much of this I can get. Then the last thing I'm going to do is grab myself some fresh white, and I'm going to tidy up a little of the smoke grenades, and I'll also pop a little bit of this on the unit markings as well, just to brighten those up. From here, what I'm going to do is, ordinarily, this would be the point I'd take him outside and varnish him. But already having done that, what I will do will be pop just a little bit of gloss varnish onto his goggles, and I will finish off his base as well. And the recipe for that will be in the description. So let's get a look at our soldier here once he's all done. And so there at last, our Blitz Legion Sergeant is complete, and I think you can tell I had a good time painting him. Having done Steel Legion alike on the channel a couple of times before, there are other methods, and I think this one would also scale quite well depending on how many of them you wanted to paint. Obviously you can skip quite a few of the little MacGuffin bits that this guy has on him, but yeah, it was fun to do. I did enjoy going all out, or at least a little further than I normally would. So, as always, thanks goes out to Exit 23 Games for the light and sound equipment, as well as all of my wonderful patrons who are keeping me ticking in paints and glue, including my gorgeous producers who are showing up on screen now. Thank you very much for your support, folks. I mean it every time. Now, any questions or anything, feel free to drop them in the old comment box below. My Blue Sky and Instagram are both linked there too. So, thank you very much for your time, one and all, and you all enjoy the rest of your day.